Okay, so I recorded this just so that if someone missed something, you could fall back to this video. A lot of the stuff is really extensively explained on the site themselves, but if you Google DUIK, spelled DUIK, it'll bring you to the site where you could download the tool. So just go down to the menu where it says download. So if you click on download there, it'll bring you to the link, and if you say click here to download DUIK, it's going to ask you to save the zip file. So I already saved this, so just remember where you saved it, and then you go and extract the zip file, which then would pretty much give you these three files, right? So if you've got these three files, you could just copy them from wherever you extracted them, and then you need to go and paste them where they actually say on the documentation on the website. So you'll see that it says pretty nicely where to put it for Windows and Mac. So you just go paste it in that folder, the three files, and then when you launch After Effects, the plugin will be installed and you'll have an extra menu under Window. So I'm just going to create a new composition. This really doesn't really matter what size or shape. DUIK works with any composition. So under Window you'll have DUIK, right? That is the new window that you just installed by pasting those files in. Now, like anything in After Effects, you could dock this window to any place where the purple markings are. So I'm just gonna dock it there. It's not really necessary, but now we've got our panel there. So to do inverse kinematics, you need objects obviously to affect. Now inverse kinematics is literally the way that most stuff work when bending, right? So if the easiest way to explain this would be to think of an arm or a leg. As we walk, our ankle pushes up, but our body doesn't necessarily move up as well, so our knee kind of bends inwards. Now it would take a lot of time to go key all of those parts, but what this tool does is you just animate one parameter, the controller, which then controls all three parts. Okay, so to explain this a little bit better, or just to show what I'm saying, I'm going to create a solid and then just draw out a very rough shape of a leg so that we can see what I'm trying to illustrate. So I'm just drawing out a quick leg, a horrible leg. So I'm doing just kind of fine-tuning my unbelievably horrible leg, but anyways. Okay, so now we've got our very simplistic leg, right? So if we wanted to bend this leg, there's a few ways, but one way that most already know about is the puppet pin tool. So you'll pin where all the pivot points would be for this object, which is a leg in this case. So the pivot would be where the hip is, another pivot would be where the knee is, and another pivot would be where the ankle is. So DUIK will create nulls for each of these pivot puppet pin tools. So it's a very good practice to go into the effects where the pin tools are, and then you go all the way through to the bottom, or in the hierarchy of the mesh, down to deform, and you'll see there's the three pins. So the first pin I'm going to rename and call hip, the second pin I'm going to call knee, and the third pin I'm going to call ankle. So now we've nicely renamed them. So usually with DUIK, what people, or I think it was in the older versions, you had to select hip and then say controller and knee and so on and so forth, but luckily now all you could do is just highlight the layer with the pins on and say you want to create bones. So it creates the bones from the puppet pin. So if you click bones, you can see that it made little nulls and it named them according to what I named them inside the puppet pins, which is great because now you've got the B, which stands for bone, so the bone, ankle, bone, knee, and bone, hip. Right, so the next step is to get these parented in the same hierarchy that they would actually work in real life. So if you think of a bone, as soon as we move our ankle, usually our knee or the hip doesn't have to move, but when we move our hips, then there is almost no chance of our knee and ankle not moving. And the same, if our knee moves, well, I guess your hip will move, but the ankle is dependent on the way that the knee moves. So you have to parent them in that hierarchy. So the ankle is the lowest level, that is the child, right? So you have to tell that the ankle will listen to the knee first, so you parent it to the knee, and then the knee will listen to the hip, so you parent the knee to the hip. So when you rotate the hip, everything moves, but when you rotate the knee, only the ankle will really move, and so the ankle is the final child, the last part in the hierarchy. Okay, great. So we kind of named that accordingly. Now we've parented them the way that they work. The last step, or before we tell DUIK to do the inverse kinematic code on this, is to get a controller. Now it won't make sense to put the controller on the hip because the hip is not the thing that's going to move the most. The ankle is really the driving force to make the knees bend, right? So we need to put the controller at the last part, the end of the inverse kinematic chain. So we're going to select the ankle and we're going to say controller, which then creates another null, which now is connected, well, not yet, but it will connect that now to that null, which will force the inverse kinematics, right? So to do this, and you need to double check that you've done the parenting of the various layers, right? So ankle to knee, knee to hip, and then the way that you select these layers are extremely important, otherwise the DUIK will definitely spit out errors. So you'll select it the way that you parented them, so the ankle we parented to the knee to the hip, and then we select the controller last. And then if with the selections being, you know, selected in the right hierarchy, so ankle to knee to hip and then the controller, you could click the IK button, which will then give you more options. Orientation is self-explanatory, but there's a nice little graphic next to it showing that which way it will bend. So if we keep it the way it is now, it's going to bend the wrong way, so we're going to choose that option. Then this just means that you get a controller to flip between FK and IK, so I'm going to leave that on, and then the controller, it's ticked to get a controller to actually let your rig stretch, which is also pretty cool. This annulure, I don't know how you pronounce that, it just means cancel. So I'm going to say OK. So nothing really happened. We got a new layer which has a lot of code in it, but this is our controller. That's what the C stands for. So it says C controller, the bone, ankle, right? So now if we move the null up, you'll see that we've got inverse kinematics, right? Which is unbelievable, and how easily that gets achieved with this lovely open source tool. Okay, so now we've got a controller controlling our leg, right? So the kind of next step is to just look at the various tools that was applied through code onto our leg. Now you've got this tick to invert, right? The FKIK, sorry, yeah, the inverse kinematics orientation, and then you get this IK tick, which pretty much just states that you want forced kinematics. Forced kinematics meaning you control all the rotation manually, and there will be times that you might need this, but I'm just going to put that off for now. Then you get the auto stretch. So if I take my null, you'll see that the leg actually stretches. So I'm going to just take that off for now to show you what the difference is. So it's, if you know any rigs in 3D, it's similar. It kind of knows it stops where the leg will stop. So you could use this also to kind of indicate where the ground is, where it hits the ground, right? Great. So, and then goal B, ankle, and end FK. Well, the end FK is when you untick IK and want to use forced kinematics. But the goal is B ankle, I'll describe a bit later, so don't worry too much about that. But it's got to do with, will it follow the goal of the rotation, or would it add on top of the other rotations? But I'll explain that more. So now we've got our leg, right? The one thing that you could notice immediately is the fact that our toe is not really working that great. So we need to add another pin tool. So I'm going to say, activate my pins again, and I'm going to say I want to add a pin there. So if we go into, I press double P to get to the options quicker, I'm going to rename this to toe. Okay, so now we've got our toe in there. Now because we have ready to run our code, it's easier to just say that our toe is another bone. So I'm going to click bone again. I'm going to just drag it so it's nicely grouped. And then our toe needs to be parented to our ankle. So now if we move the ankle around and rotate it, you can see that the toe is looking a lot more natural. Now if we untick the goal B ankle, you can see that it changes the behavior slightly, right? So if you look carefully between the controller and the null on the ankle, it follows either the null or it's on its own. It's almost like it adds on top of itself. I don't know if I'm explaining this too well, but anyway, great. So I'm going to keep that ticked on, right? So there's my nice toe controller, and you could move this around as well on top of the rotation. So now we've got our leg inverse kinematics with the solid mesh with the puppet pin tool. The next thing that I want to show you is that if you want to, well, firstly I want to move this out of the way, and the only way to do that is now to kind of get a null in there, which would be our main controller, to move everything. So we know that our controller moves most of the leg, so we need to parent that to the main controller. But we also need to parent our hip. You can see it's not parented to anything to this main controller. So now if we move the null, our leg will move all the way to the left. It's just the easy way to get it out of view. Great. So what I'm going to show you next is to do the same thing but just with shapes. So let's say you've got a segmented puppet pin, or a segmented puppet that you created. So you've got the upper leg, you've got the lower leg, and then the ankle part, or maybe even the toe would be separate, but or you've got an arm, which is the upper arm, the lower arm, so and the hand. Then you could do it that way as well. It doesn't have to be one mesh. So I'm just going to create a very kind of basic way of illustrating. So you get your upper arm, right? Then you get the lower part of the arm, and then you get your hand, right? Very simplistic way of showing this. So again, you could call this shoulder or upper arm, doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna simplify to shoulder, arm, hand. So we've got our three layers set out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Y to go to my pan behind tool, to my anchor tool, and I'm just moving the anchor points to where it would actually rotate, right? And if we think about it logically, if your hand was there, that is the way that stuff would rotate. The last thing that we need to do, or second last, is to get the hierarchy working again. So our hand will be parented to the arm, so if the arm moves, the hand will move, and our arm would be parented to the shoulder. So if the shoulder moves, everything moves, or the upper arm, when the upper arm moves, everything moves. And now we need to, last thing we need to do is create the controller, right? So if we move the controller, inverse kinematics will kick in. So we need to select the hand and click controller. Again, you could move the controller anywhere you want, but it's probably a good idea to just put the controller over the hand. And now you have to select the smallest part, the child, the second child, and then the parent. So you have to go from the smallest to the biggest influence. So hand, arm, shoulder, and then the controller, and then if you press inverse kinematics, it's going to ask you the same thing, the orientation. It's a bit hard to figure that out now because the orientation is up or down, not left and right, but luckily we've got the switch to flip that if it's wrong. So I'm going to press OK, and you can see there was a bit of a jump, and that's probably because I moved the controller. So now you can see that the controller kind of snaps to the anchor point of the hand. So now we've got inverse kinematics for the hand. Now stretching is on, so I'm just going to put stretching, auto stretch off. So now we've got inverse kinematics. Again, you could flip this depending on how your hand is working, and there's the rotation of our hands. And again, it's the same as with the leg. You've got all these parameters to play with. So now we've got our hand moving around and working nicely, and you only have to key this one controller. Okay, great. So now we've got this happening, right? So I'm gonna delete that, and you will get a lot of errors because there is, you can see here, the inverse kinematics 0 arm. I'm just gonna delete that. That's why we got errors. So now we're back to scratch, and this is just the solid that we created, right? So what I'm going to show you now is how to do the rotational morph, which I believe is a new property in DUIK version 14. So I'm just going to get a solid on screen again, and I will then kind of, I think this is what they used in the same kind of shape they used on the demo video that you see on their website. So what I'm going to do is just kind of illustrate, because I guess this is the best way of illustrating it, how to get this to bulge if you know, something rotates. So first of all, you obviously need to kind of key something, right? It needs some information to move. So that's the starting point, and then if we just highlight our mask, and that is the end point. So you get the animation happening, right? So what you need to do then is highlight the keys that has the morph on it, and say rotational morph, which then gives it a quite intense code for me. Maybe it's not that intense, but you can figure out what it says. But you can see that here it says, right, R equals this layer effect transform rotation. Now this is the parameter that will be driven, that will drive the actual animation. So what we need is, you could have taken the controller and put it in here, but I just want to show you for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to say layer new null object. Doesn't matter where the null is, but let's say it was here for the arm kind of moving inwards. So now you could say this, the rotation of the null, right? So if we go into the null all the way to its transforms, the rotation of the null should replace the letter R. So it says R equals, and then we're going to go and put it in there. So now if this rotates, you can see that it's kind of, you know, it's bulging the muscle or the arm. Now the only thing that's wrong here is that it seems that it's inverted, so I'm going to put a minus in front, so it should now bulge upwards because it was inverted. So minus will just revert it back to, so it makes more sense. So when we rotate up, it bulges up. When we rotate down, it bulges down. So you can see the power that you could obviously have. So if our leg kind of goes up, right, you could put the rotation of this null and connect it to deformations, so it looks more natural. So maybe I'll make more tutorials in depth, kind of getting that working. As soon as I get my character rigged and kind of ready for demonstration purposes, I'll probably delve into that more. Great, I hope this helped, and hope to get more tutorials on. Thanks, cheers.